Poor little girl shivers in the cold on the street and grabs the billionaire's hand and says, "Can you pretend to be my dad just until the cold goes away?" What happens next is surprising. The snow had been falling non-stop for 3 days. The white flakes turned the city into a postcard scene, but for those on the street, it was just cold, a cold that cut to the bone. Emmett Miller left the office building at 6:15, as he did every day. Not a minute more, not a minute less. The watch on his wrist marked time with the same precision with which he lived his life. Step by step, minute by minute, everything calculated. The icy wind hit his face as soon as he passed through the revolving doors. Emmett adjusted his navy blue scarf and shoved his hands into the pockets of his black coat. 6 more blocks to the subway, then a 22-minute ride, and he would be home. Alone, as always. That's when he saw her. A small girl grabbed his hand. She must have been about 4 years old. She wore a coat far too thin for this weather, with dark stains on the sleeves. Her tangled brown hair fell over her eyes, and she was shivering so much it looked like she might break. Emmett slowed his pace. He looked around. Where were her parents? Who leaves a child alone in this weather, in this cold? The girl looked up at him with large, dark eyes, and something in that gaze made him stop completely. People hurried past, some casting sideways glances, but no one stopped. No one but him. "Are you lost?" Emmett asked, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. He didn't talk to children, ever. The girl didn't answer. She just reached out her tiny hand and held 2 of his fingers. Her fingers were purple from the cold. "Where's your mother?" "I don't know." Her voice was barely a whisper. "We sleep down there near the bridge. She went to get something and told me to wait, but..." Tears began to stream down her dirty face. "Your father?" She shook her head. "We need to call the police," he said, more to himself than to her. It was then that she squeezed his hand tighter and spoke, her voice as small as she was. "Can you pretend to be my dad just until the cold goes away?" Those words hit Emmett like a punch to the gut. He felt something break inside him, a wall perhaps, one of those he had spent years building around himself. "What's your name?" he asked, crouching down to her level. "Tess," she answered, her bottom lip trembling so much she could barely speak. "Tess," he repeated. The name was simple, short, like her. "How long have you been out here?" She shrugged. "A long time." "Are you hungry?" She nodded, rubbing her belly with her free hand. Emmett glanced at his watch. 6:22. His routine was broken. By now he should have been on the subway. His dinner, a frozen meal, was waiting for him at home. He never ate out on Mondays. But he looked at Tess, and something inside him, something he didn't even know existed, made the decision. "Let's get something to eat," he said, standing up and holding her hand more firmly. Tess smiled for the first time, and Emmett noticed her teeth were chattering from the cold. The diner on the next corner was warm and full of people. The yellow lights created a stark contrast with the whiteness outside. Tess looked at everything with wide eyes, as if she had entered a magical place. They sat at a table in the back. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with red hair, widened her eyes when she saw Tess's condition. "My goodness, this child is freezing. I'll bring a hot chocolate right away." Emmett ordered burgers, French fries, and nuggets. He didn't know what kids ate, but he remembered liking those things when he was little. Tess devoured the food. She ate like someone who hadn't seen a full meal in days. Perhaps that was the case. Emmett watched her, trying not to let the turmoil he felt inside show. "How long have you been alone?" he asked, choosing his words carefully. She counted on her fingers. 3 days, I think." Then she added, "Mommy said she was going to get food and would be right back, but she didn't come back." Emmett felt a cold anger rise within him. Who would abandon a child like this? "Where did you sleep these nights?" "On the street." She took a big sip of her chocolate. "Under that bench near the bridge, but it was so cold." Her eyes filled with tears. "I tried to find Mommy, but I got lost." The questions piled up in Emmett's mind. He should call the police, social services, someone who knew how to handle this. But the idea of handing Tess over to strangers, in her current state, bothered him more than it should. When they finished eating, he made a decision he never thought he would make. "Let's buy you some clothes," he said. "That coat isn't keeping out the cold." The nearest department store was still open. Emmett, who never bought anything without researching for days, found himself filling a bag with a coat, pants, thick socks, gloves, a hat, and even a small pair of pajamas with a teddy bear print. Tess looked at everything, fascinated, as if each item were a precious gift. "Can I really keep all of this?" she asked when they left the store, already wearing the new coat, a bright red one, the color she had chosen herself. "So you can," he replied, feeling a strange lump in his throat. It was almost 8 o'clock when they reached the subway station. The snow was letting up, but the cold was still intense. Tess held Emmett's hand tightly, as if afraid he would disappear if she let go. "Where are we going now?" she asked, her eyes full of both hope and fear. Emmett thought about the call he should make, about the authorities that needed to be notified, about the paperwork, the questions, the explanations. He thought about his empty home, the silence that awaited him, just like every other day for the past few years. Then he looked at Tess, at those eyes that for some inexplicable reason trusted him. "Can you pretend to be my dad just until the cold goes away?" Her sentence echoed in his mind. "We're going home," he said finally, surprising himself with his own words. And as they entered the subway car with Tess holding his hand, Emmett had the strange feeling that that sentence, those simple words spoken by a desperate child, had just changed everything in his life. The taxi moved slowly through the snow-covered streets. The car headlights illuminated the flakes that continued to fall, turning the night into a white, blurry haze. In the back seat, Tess clutched her new red coat, fighting to keep her eyes open. The warmth of the car was making her sleepy. Emmett stared out the window, his reflection superimposed on the buildings and city lights. Who was that man in the glass? What was he doing with a child he barely knew? Tess yawned and, without realizing it, rested her head on Emmett's arm. He tensed for a moment but didn't pull away. "Are we almost there?" she asked in a small voice. "Yes, a few more blocks." The taxi stopped in front of a plain grey building with a doorman and a well-lit entrance. By the time Emmett paid the fare, Tess was almost asleep. She jumped up when he opened the door, as if afraid she had done something wrong. Emmett noticed and felt a strange pang in his chest. A child shouldn't react like that to a simple touch. "Let's go inside, it's cold out here." The doorman, a middle-aged man with a graying mustache, looked surprised to see Emmett with the little girl. In 3 years he had never seen him with a child. "Good evening, Mr. Miller," he said, opening the door. His curious eyes landed on Tess, who partially hid behind Emmett. "Good evening, Frank," Emmett replied curtly, making it clear he wouldn't be offering any explanations. In the elevator, Tess pressed herself against the mirrored wall. "Never been in an elevator before?" Emmett asked. She shook her head. "Is it very high?" "10th floor," he answered, pressing the button. As the elevator began to rise, Tess broke into a smile. Her eyes sparkled with the novelty of it. "It's like flying," she whispered, enchanted by the feeling of the elevator going up. Tess looked at her own reflection in the mirror and wrinkled her nose. "I'm very dirty," she said, running her fingers over her smudged face. "You'll have a bath soon," Emmett replied, avoiding his own reflection. He didn't want to think about what he was doing, the rules he was breaking, the complications that could arise. Apartment 1004 was exactly like Emmett, organized, practical, and without excess. White walls, dark furniture, everything in its proper place. Nothing on the walls but a large, silent clock. No photos, no plants, nothing that indicated life beyond mere existence. Tess entered with hesitant steps, as if walking on thin ice. She stood in the middle of the living room, unsure of what to do, clutching the small bag with her new clothes to her chest. "So you can sit," Emmett said, pointing to the dark grey sofa. "I'll get the guest room ready." "Guest room?" Tess asked, sitting on the edge of the sofa, her back straight as a soldier's. "Yes, for you to sleep in, just for tonight," he added quickly. "Tomorrow morning we'll sort this out." Sort this out? As if it were a math problem or a poorly drafted contract. Emmett knew he should call the police right now. It was the correct procedure. But something was stopping him. Just for tonight, he thought. Tomorrow he would do things the right way. Tess nodded, asking no more questions, as if she were used to not questioning what adults decided for her. The guest room was rarely used. It had only a single bed, a nightstand, and a small closet. Emmett quickly changed the sheets, dusted, and opened the window to air it out. Snow flurried in for a moment before he closed it again. The room was simple, but clean and warm, a luxury for someone who slept on the street. He returned to the living room where Tess was still sitting exactly as he had left her. She looked around with restrained curiosity, as if afraid to touch anything and break it. "Oh, you must want to take a bath," he said, noticing the dirt on her cheeks and hands. "The bath?" Her eyes widened as if it were a magic word. "Yes, with hot water. Come on, I'll show you the bathroom." In the hallway, they passed Emmett's bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. Tess peeked inside. "Do you have kids?" she asked suddenly. The question caught Emmett by surprise. He felt a tightness in his chest. "No." "Do you live alone?" "Yes." He opened the bathroom door. "Here, I'll show you how the shower works." It was a simple bathroom, but to Tess it looked like a palace. She touched the marble sink with her fingertips, as if it were something precious. "Is the water really hot?" Emmett turned on the shower. Steam soon began to rise. "See, hot." Tess smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. For a moment, Emmett saw what she would look like under normal circumstances, just a happy child. "Can you manage on your own?" he asked. "I can," she replied with conviction. "I'm already 4. Emmett nodded, impressed by her independence. "I'll leave towels here for you and your new clothes." He left and closed the door, standing in the hallway. He heard the sound of running water, and after a moment a happy little giggle. A sound so simple, yet it somehow made his apartment feel less empty. In the kitchen, Emmett realized he had nothing appropriate for a child to eat. His refrigerator contained only the essentials: eggs, milk, a few vegetables, and the pre-made meals he bought on Sundays. His pantry wasn't much better. "I'll have to improvise," he muttered to himself. He decided to make an omelette. Something simple but nutritious. He cracked the eggs into a bowl, added a little milk, salt, and pepper. As he whisked the mixture, his mind wandered. How did such a small child end up on the streets? Where could her mother be? Why hadn't she sought help sooner? Through the kitchen window, Emmett watched the snow fall. It was coming down even harder now. He thought of Tess sleeping under a bench in this weather, the cold she must have felt, the fear. He was so lost in thought that he barely noticed Tess entering the kitchen. She wore the new teddy bear pajamas, and her wet hair formed curls around her face. Without the dirt, her skin seemed even paler, but her cheeks had a healthy pink hue. "Are you cooking?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the frying pan. "An omelette. Do you like them?" She shrugged. "I don't know. I've never had one." Emmett felt that cold anger again. A child who had never eaten an omelette, who lived under bridges, who thought hot water was something extraordinary. "Try it. If you don't like it, I can make something else." They ate in silence at the small kitchen table. Tess devoured everything, just as she had with the hamburger. Emmett wondered how many decent meals she got in a week. "Is it good?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Very," she replied with her mouth full. "You cook better than the chef on TV." "What TV chef?" "The one in the TV store window. We always stop to watch when it's on." Emmett pictured the scene. Tess and her mother standing on the sidewalk in front of a store, looking through the window to watch cooking shows, one of the few available forms of entertainment. "Does your mom like watching TV in the windows too?" he asked, trying to gather more information. Tess nodded, stuffing another piece of omelette into her mouth. "She likes the home shows, you know, the ones with pretty houses. She says one day we'll have a house like that." Her voice trailed off. "But then she gets sad afterward." Emmett wanted to ask more about the mother, but he saw the shadow of sadness in Tess's eyes and decided to change the subject. "Want more omelette?" "Can I really?" "Of course, there's plenty." He put more food on her plate, feeling a strange satisfaction in watching her eat with such gusto. When they finished, Emmett washed the dishes while Tess watched him, sitting on a chair with her legs dangling in the air. "You always do everything so neat," she commented. "What do you mean?" "Like tidy. My mom says I'm messy, but you're not. Everything stays in its place." Emmett didn't know what to say. It was true he had always been methodical, overly organized, according to some former colleagues, but hearing it from a 4-year-old was disconcerting. "Your house is pretty," Tess continued, looking around. "It looks like the ones in commercials, all clean." Emmett looked at his own apartment as if seeing it for the first time. It was organized, yes, clean, no doubt, but it was also cold, impersonal, lifeless. "It's time for bed," he said finally. "Come on, I'll show you your room." Tess hopped off the chair and followed him down the hall. In the guest room, she climbed onto the bed and sank into the soft mattress, letting out a sigh of pleasure. "It's like a cloud," she said, lying down and pulling the blanket up to her chin. Emmett stood in the doorway, not quite sure what to do. He had never put a child to bed before. "Do you need anything?" he asked awkwardly. Tess thought for a moment. A story? Her story. Emmett didn't have any children's books. In fact, he didn't have many books, period. What kind of story? A bedtime one, with happy endings. She smiled, revealing a small gap where a baby tooth was missing. "Mommy always tells them, even when we're on the street." Emmett sat on the edge of the bed. "I'm not very good with stories," he admitted. "That's okay, it can be a tiny one." He thought for a second. "Once upon a time, there was a girl named Tess." "Like me," she exclaimed, her eyes shining. "Yes, and she was very brave. One day during a snowstorm, she met He hesitated. "A man named Emmett." "Like you?" "That's right. And he took her home where there was warm food and a soft bed." "And they lived happily ever after?" Tess asked, her eyes already heavy with sleep. Emmett swallowed hard. "We'll see," he said softly. "Now sleep." He stood up and went to the door, but before he could leave, Tess's sleepy voice reached him. "Emmett?" "Yes?" "Thank you for saving me from the cold." Something inside him tightened, a lump in his throat he couldn't swallow. "You're welcome, Tess. Good night." "Good night. Pretend, Dad," she murmured, already nearly asleep. Emmett closed the door carefully and stood in the hallway for a long time. Her words echoed in his mind. Pretend, Dad. Why did that affect him so much? He went to the living room and sat on the sofa. His routine was completely shattered. Normally at this hour he would be reviewing documents for the next day or watching the news before bed. Always the same things, in the same order, day after day. But today everything was different. There was a child sleeping in his guest room, a child who had trusted him for no reason at all, who had smiled when she saw hot water, who had never eaten an omelette before. Outside, the snow seemed to be falling even harder, covering the city in a white, silent blanket. Emmett thought of all the people on the streets that night, people like Tess's mother, perhaps. Where could she be? Was she looking for her daughter? Or had she simply given up? Emmett took his phone out of his pocket. He should call the police. It was the correct procedure, the right thing to do, but his fingers wouldn't move to dial. The thought of handing Tess over to the authorities, of seeing her taken to some shelter or foster home, made his stomach churn. Just for tonight, he thought. Tomorrow he would decide what to do. Unable to sit still, Emmett got up and went to the door of the room where Tess was sleeping. He opened it carefully so as not to make a sound. The small lamp on the nightstand cast a soft light across the room. Tess was sleeping deeply, her face relaxed, one hand under her cheek, the other clutching the blanket. She looked so small in that bed, so light, so fragile. How could the world be so cruel to someone so innocent? Emmett felt a wave of protectiveness he had never experienced before, something primal and powerful. He wanted to keep this child safe, away from the cold, away from hunger, away from fear. The little teddy bear pajamas rose and fell with her peaceful breathing. Maybe for the first time in days or weeks, Tess was sleeping without fear, without cold, without hunger. The simple awareness of this made Emmett feel something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of purpose. But what would happen tomorrow? Calling the authorities was the right thing to do. They would find her mother, or at least a suitable place for Tess. A home, a family. Not a lonely man with no idea how to care for a child. "What am I doing?" he whispered to himself, watching Tess's peaceful sleep. The question went unanswered, hanging in the air like the snowflakes still falling outside. All Emmett knew was that, at least for tonight, Tess was safe, warm, fed. And for some reason he couldn't explain, that felt more important than anything he had ever done in his entire life. He closed the door carefully and went to his own room. He lay down, knowing sleep would be slow to come. For the first time in years, his apartment didn't feel empty. There was life in it, breathing softly in the next room. And as scary as it was, as much as it turned his life upside down, Emmett couldn't feel any regret. only a strange feeling that perhaps he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The snow had stopped, but the cold remained. 3 days had passed since Tess arrived. 3 days that turned into just one more day each morning when Emmett woke up and thought about calling the authorities. 3 days in which, somehow, he couldn't bring himself to make the call. He had gone back to work. There was no way to stay home. He had explained the situation to Tess in simple, direct words. "I have to work. Will you be okay by yourself? It's just for a few hours." Tess had nodded seriously, as if she perfectly understood the gravity of the situation. "I know how to be alone. I was with Mommy a lot." Before leaving, Emmett had left clear instructions. Don't open the door for anyone, don't touch the stove, don't go out on the balcony, call him in an emergency. He had programmed his cell number on the landline's speed dial. He left prepared food in the fridge, juice on the table, cookies within her reach. Throughout the day, he checked his phone every few minutes. Every hour, he made an excuse at work and called home. Tess always answered on the first ring, as if she had been waiting. "Everything okay there?" "Everything's okay, Emmett. Did you eat something?" "I ate the sandwich. It was good." "What are you doing?" "Playing." "Playing? With what?" Emmett's apartment had no toys. It had no colors. It had nothing that could entertain a child. When he returned on the first day, he found Tess sitting on the living room rug, talking to herself. 2 sofa cushions were on the floor in front of her. She had drawn eyes and mouths on pieces of paper and taped them to the cushions. "Hi," she said when she saw him. "This is Mrs. Fluffy and Mr. Square. They're married and live in a big house." Emmett looked at the cushions-turned dolls. One was indeed fluffy, and the other square. He felt a pang of something he couldn't identify. Admiration, perhaps, for her ability to create something from nothing. "They seem nice," he said, unsure how to react. "Do you want to play with me?" Tess asked, holding out one of the cushions. "Not right now, I have to make dinner." Tess's expression fell for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Okay, we can play later." But later never came. Emmett made dinner, they ate, he washed the dishes, checked some emails, and soon it was time for her bath and bed. On the second day, he found Tess singing softly to a line of objects arranged in the hallway. A hairbrush, a pen, a paperclip, a small stapler. "What are you doing?" he asked, intrigued. "It's the Friends Parade," she explained as if it were obvious. "The brush won because it has the prettiest hair." Emmett almost smiled. Almost. "Didn't you bring any toys from where you lived before?" Tess shook her head. "We didn't have much room to keep things, only what fit in the bags." Once again, that cold anger grew inside him. What kind of life was this for a child? Now on the third day, Emmett was coming home from work early. He had managed to reschedule some meetings, delegated tasks. His boss had noticed the change, but hadn't commented. Emmett had always been so reliable, so predictable, that a small change in his routine didn't raise suspicions. When he opened the apartment door, he didn't see Tess immediately. For a second, he panicked. Where could she be? "Tess." "I'm in here." The voice came from the kitchen. Emmett dropped his briefcase and coat on the sofa, something he never did, and went to her. Tess was sitting at the table, surrounded by strange objects. Empty toilet paper rolls, jar lids, used matchboxes, rubber bands, paper clips. "What is all this?" "It's the city of the little people," she said proudly. "Look, this is the tower where the princess lives." She pointed to a structure of stacked paper rolls. "And here is the castle of the good dragon." An empty laundry detergent box, decorated with bottle caps. Emmett observed the makeshift city. It was impressive what she had managed to create with so little. With trash, actually. Things he would throw away without a second thought. "Did you get all this from the trash?" "Yes," she answered, without shame. "You were going to throw it away anyway, that's okay, right?" "No, that's not a problem," he said, still processing her creativity. "Do you want me to put it away? I can put everything in a box when I'm not playing." Her concern about not being a bother, not being a burden, squeezed Emmett's heart. A 4-year-old shouldn't have to worry about these things. "You don't have to put it away now, you can keep playing." Her face lit up. "Really? Can I show you how the city works?" "I have a few things to do first." Her smile faded a little, but she nodded, understanding. "Okay, I'll wait." Emmett went to his room, changed clothes, checked emails. but he couldn't concentrate. From time to time, he heard Tess's voice in the kitchen, creating dialogues between her characters, humming made-up songs. He left his room and stopped in the hallway. From where he stood, he could see Tess without her noticing him. The girl was completely absorbed in her imaginary world. She moved the objects, changed her voice for each character, created elaborate stories with a beginning, middle, and end. Emmett stood there watching in silence. There was something fascinating about her ability to entertain herself with so little, in her genuine joy, in her resilience. He realized that since Tess had arrived, the rhythm of his home had changed. It was no longer that silent, methodical place. There were voices, even if small ones. There was movement. There was life. And somehow he himself was changing. His schedules were no longer so rigid. His meals were not the same as always. His thoughts no longer revolved exclusively around work. Tess noticed his presence and looked up. "Do you want to play now?" she asked, hopeful. Emmett hesitated. He hadn't played since he was a child. He didn't know how. "I'm busy now, maybe later." Tess nodded, already used to the answer. She went back to playing alone, but without the same enthusiasm as before. Emmett went back to his room but couldn't focus on work. The words on the computer screen seemed jumbled, meaningless. All he could think about was the child playing alone in the kitchen, creating a whole world out of nothing. He closed the laptop and looked out the window. The sky was clear now, with no sign of more snow. Soon the cold would pass. Soon he would have no more excuses to keep Tess there. The thought bothered him more than it should. "I need to go out," he said, returning to the kitchen. "Will you be okay alone for another hour?" Tess nodded seriously. "I'll take care of the house." Something about the way she said that, as if it were her responsibility, her duty, touched Emmett deeply. "I won't be long." On the street, the cold air cleared his thoughts. Emmett walked aimlessly for a few blocks until he saw a small stationery store. In the window, colorful notebooks and pencil cases caught his eye. He went inside without a second thought. "Can I help you?" asked the shopkeeper, an elderly man with thick glasses. "I need a notebook and colored pencils." "For a child?" Emmett hesitated. "Yes, a girl, 4 years old. We have these here with cartoon characters. Kids love them." The notebook had princesses on the cover, something Emmett would never buy under normal circumstances. "I'll take it, and a pencil case, the big one, please." When he returned to the apartment, Tess was still playing in the kitchen. Her city had grown, taking up almost the entire table. "I brought you something," Emmett said a little awkwardly. Tess looked up, curious. Emmett handed her the bag from the stationery store. "For you to draw." Tess opened the bag and her eyes widened. She took out the notebook and the pencil case as if they were precious treasures. "Is it mine, for real?" "Yes, all yours." She ran her fingers over the cover of the notebook, feeling the texture. She opened the pencil case and looked at each pencil, each color, with reverence. "I've never had a notebook all to myself," she said softly, more to herself than to Emmett. He felt his chest tighten again. How could something so simple, so cheap, bring so much joy? "Can I draw now?" "Of course." Tess pushed her city to a corner of the table, opened the notebook to the first page and began to choose her colors. Emmett watched her for a moment, then turned to leave. "Aren't you going to draw too?" Tess asked, holding out a red pencil. "Me? No, I can't draw." "Everyone can draw," she stated with conviction. "You just make lines and circles. I don't think I have a talent for it." "Please." She made a pleading face that somehow disarmed all of Emmett's defenses. "Just a quick drawing," he conceded, sitting down at the table. Tess smiled and tore a sheet from the notebook, pushing it towards him. "You can draw whatever you want." Emmett picked up a blue pencil and stared at the blank paper. What should he draw? He had no idea. He hadn't drawn since when? Elementary school, maybe? "Draw a house," Tess suggested, noticing his hesitation. "A house, right." He began to trace hesitant lines. A large square, a triangle on top for the roof, a rectangle for the door, small squares for the windows. It looked like a 5-year-old's drawing. "Now, people," Tess instructed, focused on her own drawing. Emmett added 2 stick figures next to the house, a big one and a small one. "Who are they?" Tess asked, peeking at his drawing. Emmett looked at the figures. He hadn't thought about it. "I don't know, just 2 people." "Do they have names?" "No." Everyone has a name, Tess insisted. Even my paper dolls have names. Emmett looked at the stick figures again. This is Tom and this is Sarah. And they live in this house. I guess so. And what do they do there? Emmett didn't know what to say. It was just a drawing, lifeless stick figures. They cook together and watch TV. And play? Sometimes. Are they happy? The question took Emmett by surprise. Happy? It was too deep a question for such a simple drawing. I hope so. Tess smiled, satisfied with the answer. She returned to her own drawing, her tongue sticking out the corner of her mouth as she worked diligently. Emmett looked at his childish drawing. It was really bad. The lines were crooked, the proportions were off, the people looked like aliens. He couldn't help but laugh at his own effort. Tess looked up, surprised. What are you laughing at? My drawing, it's terrible. She tilted her head, examining the paper. It's not terrible, it's different, it has personality. Personality? Where did you learn that word? The lady at the library said it, when we used to go there on cold days. Emmett imagined Tess and her mother seeking shelter in the library on the coldest days. At least it would be warm there, and there were books. Your drawing is good, Emmett, Tess insisted. You know how to play, you just forgot how. Her words, so simple and direct, struck Emmett like a bolt of lightning. You know how to play, you just forgot how. When did he forget? At what point in his adult life did he lose that ability to wonder, to create, to simply play? Want to see mine? Tess asked, holding out her drawing. It was an explosion of color. In the center, two figures, one tall and one small, holding hands. The small one was wearing something red, the new coat. The tall one was wearing something dark, like Emmett's suits. Around them were what looked like flowers, even though it was winter outside, and a big yellow sun shining in the corner of the page. It's us, Tess explained, at the park. When the snow melts and it gets warm again. Emmett swallowed hard. She had drawn the two of them together, in a future he knew wouldn't happen. A future where they would still be together, walking in the park when spring arrived. It's very beautiful, Tess. Can we go to the park when the snow is gone? She asked, hopeful. Emmett didn't know what to say. He couldn't promise something like that. He couldn't feed hopes he knew would be shattered. We'll see, was all he could manage. Tess seemed satisfied with the answer. She went back to a new drawing, humming softly as she worked. Emmett sat there at the kitchen table, watching the child who, with her small hands and infinite imagination, was slowly redrawing not just the blank paper in front of her, but his life as well. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to imagine a different future. A future where perhaps there would be more drawings on the fridge, more cities made of trash on the kitchen table, more laughter echoing through the once empty rooms. A future where he, perhaps, would learn to play again. The weeks passed without Emmett even noticing. The just for tonight turned into a week, then two, and now almost a month had gone by since the night he found Tess shivering in the snow. Spring was beginning to show its first signs. The snow was slowly melting, revealing sidewalks and flower beds. The sun appeared earlier and stayed out longer, and without Emmett planning it, a new routine had formed in his life. Before, his days were like identical pages from the same book. Wake up at 6 a.m., black coffee and toast, suit and tie, work from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., dinner alone, sleep at 10 p.m., repeat. Now every morning started differently. Pancakes! Tess would exclaim almost every day when Emmett entered the kitchen. She would already be there, sitting at the table, swinging her legs in the air, waiting. Emmett had never made pancakes before Tess arrived. Now it was almost a ritual. Flour, eggs, milk, a pinch of salt. The first attempt was a disaster. Misshapen, burnt messes that Tess ate anyway, pretending they were delicious. The second was a little better. By the third week, Emmett had mastered the technique. With strawberries today? He asked on a Tuesday morning, opening the fridge. Yes, and chocolate syrup. No syrup. Too much sugar this early. Okay, she agreed easily. She always accepted the limits without question, something that still bothered Emmett. A 4-year-old should sometimes throw a tantrum over sweets. He placed the plate of pancakes in front of her and watched her eat. Tess no longer devoured her food like in the first few days, when she seemed to fear that every meal would be her last. Now she ate slowly, savoring each bite. Good? Emmett asked, sitting down with his own plate. The best in the whole world. He smiled. He smiled more now. It was impossible not to smile at Tess's exaggerated compliments and contagious joy. The pancake mornings were just the beginning. After breakfast, while Emmett got ready for work, Tess would organize her drawing supplies in the living room. The once immaculate sofa now had crayon stains, and Emmett didn't mind one bit. "I'm making a new one today," she announced, spreading sheets of paper on the coffee table. For the collection. The collection was a series of drawings held by magnets on the refrigerator. It had started with one, then two, and now covered almost the entire door. Colorful landscapes, stick figure people, imaginary animals, the world as seen through Tess's eyes. Emmett had cut back his hours at the office. He had talked to his boss, made up a story about family problems that required his attention. It was almost true. He left earlier, arrived later. His old self would have considered this unthinkable. The afternoons when he returned home always brought a surprise. Sometimes Tess would be drawing. Other times she had turned the living room furniture into a fort, with sheets draped between the sofa and chairs. Once, he found her reorganizing the bookshelf by color, creating a literary rainbow. "It looks prettier this way," she explained. "Before it was all dark and sad." Emmett couldn't disagree. At some point, without him realizing how or when music entered their lives. It started when Emmett turned on the radio while washing the dinner dishes. An old 80s song was playing, and he caught himself humming softly. "You can sing," Tess exclaimed, surprised and delighted. "Not very well," he replied, a little embarrassed. "Sing more," she pleaded, and he couldn't refuse. Since then, the radio stayed on at the end of the day. An oldies station, nothing too loud. Sometimes Emmett would catch Tess dancing around the living room, spinning and jumping to the melodies. Other times, she would pull him by the hand, insisting they dance together. "I don't know how to dance," he would protest. "So you just move your body to the music," she would teach, demonstrating with clumsy, joyful movements. And to his own surprise, Emmett found himself dancing. Clumsily, yes, embarrassed always, but dancing. The nights brought the most precious ritual, story time. Emmett had bought a few children's books, but Tess usually preferred made-up stories. "Tell the one about the robot who wanted a heart," she'd ask, curled up in her blankets. "Again?" "It's my favorite." So Emmett would tell it, each time adding new details, new characters. Stories he never imagined he'd be able to create flowed from his mouth as Tess listened, her eyes wide with admiration. "You make up the best stories," she would say before falling asleep. Emmett knew it wasn't true. His stories were simple, sometimes nonsensical, but in Tess's eyes he was a brilliant storyteller, a culinary master, a talented dancer. In her eyes, he was extraordinary. On that particular night, after a story about space pirates, Emmett lingered by Tess's bed. He watched her sleeping face, her long eyelashes, her now rosy and healthy cheeks. She was no longer the pale, frightened child he had found in the snow. On the way to his own room, Emmett stopped in the hallway. He looked around at his once organized and silent apartment. Now there were drawings everywhere, a basket of improvised toys in the corner of the living room, a pair of children's sneakers, red like the coat he bought that first night, thrown near the door. The perfect organization was gone. The silence was gone too, and in its place there was life. Emmett sat on the sofa and turned on the radio, keeping the volume low. A soft melody filled the room. He closed his eyes and let the music wash over him. "She's changing my silence," he thought. It wasn't just the literal silence, the absence of sound that once dominated the apartment. It was something deeper. The silence within himself, the emptiness he had carried for so long, he couldn't remember what it was like to live without it. Tess was filling that silence with colors, music, stories, and pancakes, with unanswerable questions and surprising wisdom for someone so small, with clumsy dances and reasonless laughter. Emmett's phone buzzed on the table. It was a work email about an important meeting the next day. Before, he would have opened it immediately, maybe worked for a few more hours. Now, he left the phone where it was. Work could wait. The silence had waited long enough. Emmett leaned back on the sofa, a faint smile on his lips, and allowed himself to simply exist in that moment. With the soft music in the background and the comforting presence of Tess sleeping in the next room, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Not the peace of emptiness, of silence, of solitude, but the peace of being exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing. Pancakes for breakfast, drawings in the living room, soft music at the end of the day, stories before bed. A delicate routine, built almost without noticing, one day at a time. And at the center of it all, a little girl who, by asking for shelter from the cold, had ended up offering so much more than he could have ever imagined. The decision wasn't easy. Emmett spent sleepless nights weighing the pros and cons, imagining scenarios, fearing the outcome, but he knew it was the right thing to do. Tess needed her mother, and her mother, wherever she was probably desperately looking for her. That's what he told himself, although a small, selfish voice inside him wished they would never find her. On a rainy day in April, while Tess was drawing in the living room, Emmett made the call. Jordan and Associates, Private Investigations. How can I help you? My name is Emmett Miller. I need to find someone. Peter Jordan's office was downtown, in an old building with a noisy elevator. Emmett preferred to go alone, leaving Tess in the care of Mrs. Novak, a retired neighbor who had been charmed by the girl. The investigator was a man in his 50s, with graying temples and eyes that looked like they had seen it all. So, Mr. Miller, who are we looking for? Emmett took a deep breath. A woman named Maeve. I don't know her last name. She's the mother of a child who is with me. Peter Jordan showed no surprise. In his line of work, strange stories were routine. And how did this child end up with you? Emmett told him everything. The encounter in the snow, the decision to take Tess home, the days that turned into weeks, and now more than a month. I know I should have contacted the authorities, he admitted, but you got attached to the girl, Jordan completed with no judgment in his voice. Yes? And now you want to find the mother. I need to know if she's okay, if she's looking for Tess, and if she's capable of taking care of her. The investigator jotted down some notes. What do you know about this Maeve? It was so little. Tess was only 4 and her descriptions were vague and childlike. Hair like mine, but longer, she had said when Emmett asked, and eyes the color of the sky, and a pretty smile even when she's sad. I know they were living on the streets, Emmett explained to Jordan, probably for a few months, maybe longer. Tess mentioned they frequented the central library on very cold days, and they used to sleep near the Riverside Bridge. Anything else? Any places they frequented, people they knew? Emmett thought about his conversations with Tess. She mentioned a TV store where they would stop to watch cooking and home decorating shows, and a shelter where they stayed a few times, but I don't know which one. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I'll need a more detailed description, and it would be good to have a photo of the girl. Sometimes people remember a child more easily. Emmett hesitated. Tess had become such an intimate part of his life that the idea of showing her picture to strangers bothered him. It's just to help with the search, Jordan assured him, sensing his hesitation. Complete discretion, as we agreed. I'll email it later today. On the way home, the rain had stopped. The sky was beginning to clear, and Emmett felt a weight on his shoulders. He had done the right thing, he knew that. So why did he feel so distressed? Mrs. Novak opened the door with a smile. How did everything go? She asked softly. Fine. Thank you for staying with her. It was a pleasure. We made cookies. The living room was spotless, with no sign of the usual mess. Tess came running from the kitchen, an improvised apron still tied around her waist. Emmett, we made chocolate chip cookies. Do you want one? I made a special one for you with extra chocolate. He smiled, the anguish momentarily forgotten. Of course I do. Mrs. Novak said goodbye, refusing the money Emmett tried to give her. Having a child in the house again was payment enough, she said. Feel free to bring Tess over whenever you need. When they were alone, Tess dragged Emmett to the kitchen, where a tray of cookies was cooling on the counter. This one's yours, she said, pointing to a larger, more irregular cookie than the others. I put 3 chocolate chips in it. Emmett bit into the still warm cookie and made a sound of approval. It's delicious. I knew it, Tess celebrated, grabbing one for herself. Mrs. Novak said you'd like it. She said I have a talent for baking. She's right. They sat at the kitchen table, eating cookies and drinking milk. Emmett watched Tess, noticing how different she looked from the scared child he'd met on that snowy night. Her cheeks were fuller, her eyes brighter, her smile easier. What did you do today? she asked, licking chocolate from her fingers. Emmett hesitated. He didn't want to lie, but he also didn't know how to explain. I took care of some work things. It wasn't exactly a lie. He had stopped by the office before going to the investigator. Are you going to work again tomorrow? Just in the morning. In the afternoon we can go to the park if it doesn't rain. Tess's face lit up. Really? To the real park? Really, for real. She jumped from her chair and hugged him, something she did more often now. Emmett no longer tensed up when it happened. On the contrary, he returned the hug, feeling a comforting warmth in his chest. The following days brought an even closer routine between them. It was as if, knowing deep down that their time together might be limited, they both clung to every moment. They went to the park where Tess ran, swung and slid until she was exhausted. They visited the zoo on a sunny Sunday, and she was amazed by every animal. They had a picnic by the lake, and Emmett taught her how to skip stones on the water. On each of these occasions, he discreetly took pictures. To remember, he told himself, but he also sent some to Peter Jordan, who continued his search. I'm following a few leads, the investigator informed him in a brief call. There's a woman who matches the description. She was seen at the St. Clair's shelter about a month ago. I'm checking it out. Emmett thanked him and hung up, feeling his stomach sink. This was what he wanted, wasn't it? To find Maeve, to reunite mother and daughter, to do the right thing. So why did the news of a possible whereabouts leave him so shaken? The next evening, as they were making dinner together, spaghetti with tomato sauce, Tess's new specialty, it happened. She was carefully stirring the sauce, the tip of her tongue sticking out in concentration, when the spoon slipped, splattering red sauce on the stove. Dad, look at this, she began, turning to him. Then she stopped, her eyes wide. I mean, Emmett. Time seemed to freeze. Dad, she had called him Dad. Tess looked mortified, as if she had made a terrible mistake. Sorry, she mumbled. I didn't... Emmett walked over and grabbed a cloth to clean up the spilled sauce. It's okay, he said softly. Accidents happen. She looked at him, unsure if he was referring to the sauce or the dad. I'm not mad, he assured her. They finished making dinner in silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was filled with something unsaid but felt. Later, after putting Tess to bed and telling the usual story, Emmett sat in the living room with a cup of tea. The word echoed in his mind. Dad, so simple, so small, and yet so powerful. He had never imagined being a father. He had never felt that something was missing in his organized, lonely life. But now, after hearing that word from Tess's mouth, even if by mistake, something had changed inside him. He picked up his phone and looked at the latest message from Peter Jordan. Possible location. We'll call tomorrow with details. Emmett closed his eyes. Tomorrow, perhaps everything would change again. Maybe Maeve would be found. Maybe Tess would go back to her real family. Maybe the word Dad would never be directed at him again. But that night, in that moment, he kept it with him, like a treasure, like a gift he didn't deserve but had received nonetheless. Dad. Of all the words he had ever heard in his life, none had ever sounded so sweet. The call came on a Sunday morning. Emmett was in the kitchen making pancakes while Tess set the table, placing the silverware with exaggerated care, her tongue sticking out in concentration. And we have news, Peter Jordan said on the other end of the line. We found Maeve. Emmett's world seemed to stop. He turned his back so Tess wouldn't see his expression. Where? He asked quietly. At the St. Vincent's shelter. She's been there for 3 days. Before that, from what I've gathered, she was between hospitals and the streets. Jordan paused. She's not well, Mr. Miller. Emmett closed his eyes for a moment. What's wrong with her? Pneumonia, apparently. She refused hospitalization, but she's weak. And it seems there are other issues. The people at the shelter said she's been asking for a child, a little girl. Does she know her daughter is with me? No, I thought it would be best if you told her yourself. Another pause. I should warn you that, well, she's really debilitated. It might be a shock for the girl. Emmett thanked him and hung up. He stood still for a few seconds, trying to process the information. Maeve was alive. She was sick. She was looking for Tess. Emmett, the pancakes are burning. Tess's voice brought him back. The pan was letting off a light smoke, the batter darkening at the edges. Sorry, I got distracted. They ate breakfast in silence. Tess noticed something had changed, but she didn't ask. Sometimes Emmett forgot how perceptive she was, how she understood adults better than she should. "Tess," he said finally, "I have some news." She dropped her fork and looked at him with wide eyes, anxious but also fearful. "I found your mother." Her face transformed. A mix of joy, fear, and confusion passed over her features in seconds. "Mommy?" she whispered, as if the word were magic and could make Maeve appear right there. "Yes, she's at a place called St. Vincent's Shelter. It's a place for people who need help." "Is she okay?" Her voice was small, so small it was barely audible. Emmett hesitated. "How do you explain this to a 4-year-old? "She's sick, Tess, but she's going to be okay. We're going to visit her today. Is that okay with you?" Tess nodded energetically, already jumping out of her chair. "Can we go now? Can I bring my drawings to show her? And can I wear my new dress? The one Mrs. Novak gave me?" Tess's excitement was palpable. She ran around the apartment, grabbing drawings, telling her improvised dolls that she was going to see her mum, changing her clothes 3 times until she decided which one Maeve would like best. Emmett watched her, his heart heavy. What would happen after this meeting? Would Maeve recover and take Tess away? Or would she be unable to care for her daughter? Both scenarios scared him, for different reasons. St. Vincent's Shelter was in an old church building, renovated to serve the homeless. When they arrived, a middle-aged woman with a social worker's name tag greeted them. "Mr. Miller, I'm Claire Winters. We spoke on the phone." Emmett nodded, holding Tess's hand firmly. "This is Tess," he said, "Maeve's daughter." The social worker crouched down to Tess's level. "Hello, Tess. Your mum is going to be so happy to see you. She's been talking about you a lot." Tess partially hid behind Emmett, suddenly shy. "How is she?" Emmett asked. Claire hesitated, glancing at Tess. "Let's talk as we walk," she suggested. "Tess, do you want to see the fish in the aquarium at the reception?" While Tess was distracted by the aquarium, Claire spoke softly. "Maeve has pneumonia, as we informed you. She refused to go to the hospital several times, but we managed to get her on antibiotics. She's weak, malnourished, and there are other problems." "What kind of problems?" Claire sighed. "We don't have an official diagnosis, but we suspect untreated mental health issues. She has episodes of confusion, sometimes paranoia. Other times, she's extremely lucid and articulate." Emmett processed the information slowly. "Does she have family, anyone who can help?" "As far as we know, no. She doesn't talk much about her past, but she's mentioned her daughter constantly since she arrived. She was desperate, thinking something terrible had happened to the girl. She abandoned Tess," Emmett said, feeling the old anger return. "She left her alone in the snow." Claire shook her head. "From what we've been able to piece together, Maeve went out to get medicine for her daughter, who had a fever. There was a sudden snowstorm, she got disoriented and ended up passing out. When she woke up, she was in a hospital, and she spent days trying to find her daughter, but in her confused state." Emmett's anger dissolved a little. It hadn't been abandonment. It had been a tragedy, a series of unfortunate events. "Does she know I'm with Tess?" "We told her her daughter was safe with a good person, but we didn't give details. We thought it would be better for you to talk." Emmett nodded. "Tess," he called, "let's go see your mom now." The girl ran to his side, holding a drawing she had quickly made while they waited. "I made a little fish for Mommy." The room was at the end of a long hallway. It was small, with 2 beds, but only one was occupied. A thin woman with brown hair like Tess's was looking out the window. When she heard the door open, she turned. Her eyes met Tess's, and for a moment the world seemed to freeze. "Tess?" Her voice was hoarse, weak, but full of emotion. "My Tess!" "Mommy!" Tess let go of Emmett's hand and ran to the bed. Maeve opened her arms and Tess threw herself into them. They hugged as if the world were ending, as if that embrace could heal all the wounds of the past few months. Emmett stood in the doorway, suddenly feeling like an intruder. This was a sacred reunion between a mother and daughter. There was no place for him here. Claire touched his arm. "I'll leave you alone. I'll be in my office if you need anything." When she left, Emmett entered the room and closed the door. He stood there, not knowing what to do or say. Maeve looked up, still holding her daughter. Blue eyes, just as Tess had described, the color of the sky. But now they were circled by deep, dark rings in a face that was too pale and thin. "Oh, you're Emmett," she said. It wasn't a question. Yes? You took care of my daughter. Yes? She hugged Tess tighter, as if afraid the girl might disappear. Thank you, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I thought I had lost her forever. Tess pulled back a little and looked at her mother's face. Her expression changed from joy to concern. Mommy's sick, she whispered, touching Maeve's thin face with a hesitant little hand. Maeve tried to smile. Just a little bit, sweetheart. I'm already getting better. But a harsh cough interrupted her, contradicting her words. She doubled over, her whole body shaking with the effort. Emmett stepped closer, worried. Do you need water or should I call a nurse? Maeve shook her head, still coughing. When she finally got it under control, she was even paler, and a thin sheen of sweat covered her forehead. I'm fine, she said, but her voice was now even weaker. Tess looked at her mother with eyes full of fear. She turned to Emmett, as if he could fix everything, as he had fixed so many things in her life over the past few months. Emmett, Maeve said, can I talk to you alone? He nodded, surprised. Tess, why don't you go show your drawing to Ms. Clare? I'm sure she'll love it. Tess hesitated, reluctant to leave her mother so soon. I just need to say something to Emmett, Maeve assured her. Grown-up stuff, boring, I'll be right back. Reluctantly, Tess left the room. As soon as the door closed, Maeve let the forced smile fall, revealing the exhaustion behind it. I'm not well, she said simply. The doctors say I need to go to the hospital, severe pneumonia, but I couldn't, not without knowing where Tess was. Emmett pulled a chair over and sat beside the bed. Now you know she's safe, well cared for. You found her that night in the storm. It wasn't a question. Yes, she asked me to pretend to be her dad just until the cold went away. A tear ran down Maeve's face. I promised I'd come back. I went out to buy medicine for her. She had a fever. But the storm, I got disoriented. I fell. When I woke up, I was in a hospital. She took a deep breath, which triggered another coughing fit. I looked for her every day, but I was so confused, so weak. You don't have to explain, Emmett said. The important thing is that you found each other again. Maeve studied him for a long moment. You care about her? Yes. She looks happy, healthy. Her eyes filled with tears again. Thank you for taking care of her when I couldn't. It was nothing. It was everything. Maeve took Emmett's hand, surprising him. Her fingers were ice cold. I need to ask you for one more favor. What is it? I'm going to the hospital. I don't know how long I'll be there. Tess can't stay here at the shelter, and I have no family, no friends who can... She can stay with me, Emmett said immediately, for as long as it takes. The relief on Maeve's face was palpable. Are you sure? It's a lot of responsibility and you've already done so much. I'm sure she has a room, clothes, toys. She's happy there. He hesitated. And later, when you're better, we can decide what to do. Maeve nodded, too exhausted to continue the conversation. Emmett called the nurse, who confirmed that an ambulance was already on its way to transfer Maeve to the hospital. When Tess returned, Emmett explained in simple words that her mother needed to go to a special place where doctors would take care of her until she was well. The fear in the little girl's eyes was heartbreaking. Is she leaving again? Tess asked, her voice trembling. Emmett knelt to her level. No, we're going to take care of her together. She's going to the hospital and we'll visit her every day. And when she's better, she'll come live with us for a while, okay? Tess nodded, clinging to him as if he were her anchor in the storm. Promise? I promise. The following days were a whirlwind. Maeve was admitted with severe pneumonia, malnutrition, and anemia. The doctors were cautious in their prognosis, but hopeful. Emmett arranged everything: insurance, payments, paperwork. He and Tess visited the hospital every day. She brought drawings, told stories from the school Emmett had enrolled her in, chatted endlessly about the apartment, the pancakes, Mrs. Novak, the trips to the park. Maeve listened to it all with a faint smile, getting a little better each day. Sometimes when she thought no one was looking, Emmett would catch her watching him with Tess, an enigmatic expression on her face. After 2 weeks, the doctors announced that Maeve could be discharged. She would need care, rest, proper nutrition and medication, but she could continue her recovery at home. But we don't have a home, she said quietly to Emmett when they were alone. You have mine, he replied simply, for as long as you need. The day Maeve came to the apartment was a revolution. Tess was so excited she could barely stand still. She decorated the guest room with flowers picked from the park, made special drawings to tape on the wall, and chose the best books from the small library Emmett had set up for her. "Mommy is going to sleep here with me," she announced proudly. "Wouldn't it be better for your mum to have her own room to rest?" Emmett suggested. "You can stay in my room and I'll sleep on the couch." "But won't you be uncomfortable?" Maeve asked, still too weak to argue much. "I'll be fine, it's temporary." Temporary. The word hung in the air, laden with unsaid meanings. When Maeve finally arrived, leaning on Emmett to climb the stairs, Tess practically exploded with joy. She showed her every corner of the apartment, talking non-stop, as if trying to compress months of absence into minutes of conversation. Maeve smiled, tired but visibly happy to be with her daughter again. Emmett watched them from a distance, feeling a strange tightness in his chest. It was good to see Tess so excited, so complete now that she had her mother back, but there was also a growing fear, a knot that formed whenever he thought about the future. In the days that followed, the apartment took on a new dynamic. Maeve spent a lot of time resting, but gradually began to participate more in the routine. Sometimes, Emmett would come home from work to find the two of them in the kitchen, preparing dinner together. Or in the living room, Maeve brushing Tess's hair while they watched a cartoon. The smell of home-cooked food began to greet Emmett when he opened the door. Female laughter echoed through the rooms. Conversations happened over dinner, stories were shared. Music played more frequently. It was as if the apartment, once so sterile, had finally become a home. One night, after Tess and Maeve had gone to bed, Emmett sat alone on the balcony. Spring was in full swing and the night was mild. He looked at the city lights, thinking about how much his life had changed in such a short time. He remembered the silence that once filled every corner of that apartment. A silence he had mistaken for peace, when in reality it was just emptiness. An emptiness he didn't even know existed, until Tess, and now Maeve, had filled it. But along with this realization came fear. One day, perhaps soon, they would leave. Maeve would fully recover her health, find a job, a place to live with her daughter, and he would return to his silence, to his emptiness. Only now, knowing what he had lost, it would be so much worse. The thought scared him more than anything he had ever faced. He was so absorbed in these reflections that he didn't hear the balcony door open. "It's a beautiful night," Maeve said, joining him. She looked better, her cheeks starting to regain their color, her eyes brighter. "Yes, it is," he replied, surprised by the company. They stood in silence for a moment, looking at the city. "Tess adores you," she said finally. "I've never seen her so happy." Emmett didn't know what to say. "Tayo gave her something I never could," Maeve continued. "Stability, security. Tayo did the best you could under the circumstances," he said, feeling the need to defend her. Maeve smiled sadly. "Maybe, but it wasn't enough, was it?" She took a deep breath. "You know, when I saw her with you at the hospital, I saw how she looked at you, like you were her hero. She's just grateful." "It's more than that." Maeve looked directly at him. "She loves you, Emmett, and I think you love her too." Emmett didn't deny it. He couldn't. "What happens now?" he asked, the question that had been tormenting him for days. Maeve looked at the city lights again. "I don't know. I just know I don't want to take her away from this, from the safety, the happiness." She paused. "From you." The words hung between them, full of unsaid possibilities. Emmett felt something ignite inside him, a small flame of hope he hadn't dared to nurture. They stood there side by side on the balcony, looking out at the night, each lost in their own thoughts about the uncertain future that awaited them. Summer arrived in all its fullness. The park trees displayed a vibrant green. Flowers bloomed in beds throughout the city, and the sky remained blue for hours on end. The snow and cold of winter seemed like a distant memory, almost like a dream. 2 months had passed since Maeve had come to live in Emmett's apartment. 2 months of adjustments, discoveries, and a strange harmony that none of them had expected to find. Maeve had gradually regained her health. Her cheeks gained color, her body recovered the lost weight, and the persistent cough finally disappeared. Even the episodes of mental confusion became rare, then non-existent. On that Saturday morning, while Tess was still asleep, Maeve was preparing breakfast. The aroma of fresh bread and freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen. Emmett came in, already dressed for the day. "Good morning," he said, pouring himself some coffee. "Sleep well?" "Very well, thank you." Maeve smiled, putting scrambled eggs on a plate. "Tess is still sleeping. She stayed up late drawing yesterday." Emmett nodded, sipping his coffee. There was something different in the air that morning, a subtle tension as if they both knew an important conversation was about to happen. "Emmett," Maeve began, sitting at the table with him, "we need to talk." He felt a tightness in his chest. This was it. The moment he had been dreading for weeks, the moment she would say it was time to leave. "Of course," he replied, trying to keep his voice neutral. Maeve took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I'm completely recovered now. The doctor gave me a clean bill of health at yesterday's appointment." "That's great." "It is." She fiddled with the rim of her cup, avoiding direct eye contact. "And I got a job at the Central Library. It's not much, but it's a start." "Maeve, that's wonderful," Emmett said, genuinely happy for her. "When do you start?" "Monday. I'll be helping in the children's section, cataloging, organizing events, story time, things I've always loved." Emmett could see the glint of pride in her eyes. Maeve had a degree in literature, he had discovered during their long evening talks. She had been a teacher before a series of tragedies led her to the streets. "It'll be perfect for you." Maeve nodded, and then came the moment Emmett had been dreading. "I'm grateful for everything, Emmett. For taking care of Tess, for taking me in, for everything." She finally raised her eyes to meet his. "But we've been a burden long enough. You have your own life, sir. We can't keep imposing." The words hit Emmett like a punch to the gut, even though he had been expecting them. The "sir" especially stung. It was as if she was deliberately creating distance between them after weeks of close cohabitation. "You're not a burden," he said, but the words sounded inadequate, insufficient. "That's very kind of you to say. But we know it's true. Your apartment wasn't made for 3 people. Your life wasn't planned to include a woman and a 4-year-old child." Emmett put his cup down on the table, trying to organize his thoughts. What could he say? How could he explain that the idea of returning to his old life, organized, predictable, empty, terrified him? "Where would you go?" he asked, trying to buy time. "There's a transitional shelter for families on the east side. We can stay there until I can save enough money for a small place." She smiled, trying to look confident, but Emmett saw the fear in her eyes. "We'll be fine." A shelter. After everything, Tess would go back to a shelter. The girl who now had a room full of drawings, who knew the safety of a home, who was finally starting to act like a normal child, without constant fear in her eyes. "No," Emmett said, the word coming out stronger than he intended. Maeve looked at him surprised. "Having Tess by my side was the best thing that ever happened to me," he continued, the words flowing now straight from the heart. "I care for her very much. I want to help you both." Maeve's eyes filled with tears. "Emmett, before you arrived, my life was empty. I didn't realize it, but it was just work, routine, silence." He paused, searching for the right words. "Now there are pancakes in the morning, and drawings on the fridge, and bedtime stories, and laughter, so much laughter." A tear streamed down Maeve's face, but she didn't wipe it away. "I'm not ready to give that up," Emmett admitted. "I'm not ready to say goodbye." The silence that followed felt charged with electricity. Maeve looked at him as if she was seeing him for the first time, really seeing him. "What are you suggesting?" she finally asked, her voice low. Emmett hadn't planned this. He didn't have a prepared speech or a formal proposal, but when he spoke, he knew it was exactly what he wanted. "I could find a place for you, a place nearby, help until you're stable." The words came quickly now. "Tess could stay in the school where I enrolled her. You'd have your own space, your independence, but we wouldn't have to separate completely." Maeve studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher a complex puzzle. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would you do this for us?" It was the question Emmett had been asking himself for weeks. Why did he care so much? Why did the thought of them leaving terrify him? "Because you're both important to me," he said finally. "Because when Tess calls me Dad by mistake, or when you and I talk late into the night about books, or when the 3 of us go out for ice cream in the park, that's when I feel truly alive." More tears streamed down Maeve's face, but now she was smiling. "Emmett Miller," she said softly, "you have the most generous heart I have ever known. Before Emmett could respond, they heard small, hurried footsteps. "Good morning." Tess burst into the kitchen, her hair disheveled and pajamas wrinkled. She stopped when she saw Maeve's tears. "Mommy, why are you crying? Are you sick again?" "No, sweetie," Maeve reassured her, wiping her tears. "These are happy tears." "Why?" Maeve looked at Emmett, and something silent was communicated between them. An understanding, a promise. "Because," she said, pulling Tess onto her lap, "Emmett had a wonderful idea. He's going to help us find a house of our own, right near here." Tess's eyes widened. "A real house just for us?" "Yes, just for us." "And Emmett?" "He'll still live here in his apartment." Tess's face fell visibly. "But we'll still see him, right?" "Every day if you want," Emmett assured her. "I'll always be close by." Tess's expression lit up again. "Promise." "I promise." The search for a house began that very day. Emmett had already researched a few options, anticipating this moment would come. 3 blocks from his apartment, there was a small house for rent. 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, a tiny backyard, but big enough for some flowers or maybe a swing. When they went to see it, Tess ran from room to room, enchanted. "Can I have my own room with purple walls?" "Purple?" Emmett asked, surprised. "It's my favorite color of the week," Tess explained seriously. "Last week it was yellow." Maeve laughed, the musical sound filling the empty house. "We'll see about the purple walls." Emmett signed the lease the next day. When Maeve protested, saying she would pay as soon as she could, he was firm. "Consider it a loan if you prefer, or a gift. But don't worry about it right now." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Emmett, Maeve, and Tess visited second-hand furniture stores, thrift shops, and clearance sales. Each piece was chosen carefully, thinking not only of its utility, but also how it would match the rest. "This sofa," Maeve would say, running her hand over the dark green fabric, "matches the curtains we saw yesterday. And we can put colorful pillows on it," Tess would add, always thinking of adding color to everything. Emmett watched the two of them, feeling a strange mix of joy and melancholy. He was helping them build a home he wouldn't officially be a part of. But then Maeve would turn to him. "What do you think, Emmett? It would look good in the living room, wouldn't it? And there's enough space for the 3 of us to watch movies together." The 3 of us, the words warmed him inside. As the house took shape, a silent routine also grew between them. Plans were made naturally without them needing to discuss it. "On Sunday we'll have lunch at the new house," Maeve would suggest, "to celebrate. And then we can go to the movies," Emmett would add. "There's that new animated film." "And ice cream after," Tess would complete, as if it were obvious they would spend the whole day together. Moving day finally arrived. There wasn't much to take, just the clothes, books, and toys they had accumulated over the last few months. Emmett helped carry the boxes, assemble the furniture, and organize each room. By the time they hung the last picture, a framed drawing by Tess showing 3 figures holding hands under a big yellow sun, it was already evening. "It's perfect," Maeve said, looking around the small living room. The green sofa, the floral curtains, the coffee table that Emmett had sanded and varnished. Nothing matched perfectly, and yet everything seemed to be exactly where it should be. "There's just one thing missing," Tess said, running to her backpack. She pulled out an object wrapped in colored paper, a housewarming present. It was a simple picture frame, made of cardboard and decorated with pasta-painted gold. A school project. Inside, a photo of the 3 of them at the park, taken a few weeks earlier. Tess in the center, Maeve and Emmett on either side, all smiling at the camera. "To put on the coffee table," Tess explained, "so that Emmett is always here too." Maeve hugged her daughter, her eyes shining with emotion. "It's perfect, sweetheart." Emmett felt a lump in his throat. It was an increasingly familiar feeling, this knot of emotion that arose when he realized how much Tess had included him in her life, in her heart. "Thank you, Tess," he managed to say. Life found a new rhythm in the following months. Maeve started her job at the library and blossomed in it. Her knowledge of literature and her natural skill with children quickly made her a valued employee. Tess loved her new school. She made friends, learned to read simple words, and brought home a multitude of art projects that soon decorated the walls of her purple room. Emmett continued his work at the office, but something had changed. He didn't stay late for no reason. He didn't bring work home on weekends. He no longer lived for work. Work was just one part of his life now. The other part, the most important part, was the dinners at Maeve and Tess's house 3 times a week. The Sunday outings, the movie nights with popcorn, the visits to the zoo, the museum, the beach, the bedtime stories he still told Tess, even though he had to leave afterward now. On one of those nights, after putting Tess to bed, Emmett and Maeve sat on the back porch. The small yard had been transformed. Maeve had planted colorful flowers along the edges and a small herb garden in a corner. Emmett had installed a simple swing for Tess under the only tree. "She's so happy," Maeve commented, watching the crescent moon in the sky. "I've never seen her like this before, so secure, so confident." "You seem happy too," Emmett observed. Maeve smiled. "I am. For the first time in a long time, I feel like we're really okay, that we have a future." She turned to him. "Thanks to you. It wasn't just because of me. But without you, none of this would be possible." She paused. "Do you know what Tess asked me yesterday?" "What?" "Why you don't live with us, why you have to go home every night." Emmett felt his heart race. "And what did you answer?" "The truth, that you have your own home, that we're friends." "Friends?" The word felt simultaneously appropriate and insufficient. "And she accepted that?" Maeve laughed softly. "Actually, she said you should at least stay for breakfast, since you make the best pancakes." Emmett laughed too. "The best pancakes, huh?" She's not wrong. The silence that followed was comfortable, full of unsaid possibilities. "You know," Emmett said finally, "it's been 8 months since that night in the snow." 8 months, Maeve repeated thoughtfully. "It feels both much longer and much shorter at the same time." "Yes." They sat side by side, looking at the small garden, at the swing moving gently in the night breeze, at the moon that illuminated everything with its silver light. They didn't talk about the future that night. There was no need. Somehow, without needing to define or name it, they had become a family. A family built not by blood or paper, but by daily choices, by the decision to stay, to help, to love. And as Emmett walked back to his apartment that night, he knew with absolute certainty that he would never be truly alone again. Because just 3 blocks away, in a small house with flowers in the garden and a swing under the tree, were 2 people who were waiting for him, who counted on him, who included him in their plans, in their lives, in their hearts. And that, he realized, was all he could ever wish for. Autumn painted the park trees in shades of red, orange, and gold. The sky was a perfect blue without a single cloud, and the sun shone softly, offering warmth without being overwhelming. An ideal day for a picnic. Emmett spread the checkered blanket on the grass, while Maeve arranged the food they had prepared together that morning. Sandwiches, fruit, homemade cookies, and apple juice, Tess's favorite. The little girl ran across the lawn, chasing a butterfly, her brown hair flying in the wind. She was different from the scared child Emmett had found almost a year ago. Taller, stronger, her eyes bright with joy and confidence. "Tess, come eat," Maeve called, setting out the disposable plates. The girl came running, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "I have a surprise," she announced, opening the small backpack she was carrying. "I made it at school yesterday, but I haven't shown anyone yet." She took out a carefully folded piece of paper. She looked at Emmett with a smile full of expectation. "It's for you," she said, handing him the paper. Emmett unfolded it carefully, as if it were the most precious of treasures. It was a colorful drawing, much more sophisticated than her first works. It showed 3 people holding hands in front of 2 houses, one large and one small, obviously representing Emmett's apartment and the house of Maeve and Tess. The figures were clearly identifiable. Tess in the middle, Maeve on the left with her long hair, and Emmett on the right, tall and dark-haired. Everyone was smiling, and a big sun shone in the sky. At the top of the page, in colorful, slightly crooked letters, was written, "My family." Emmett felt his heart expand in his chest, filled with an emotion so large it could barely fit inside him. "It's beautiful, Tess," he managed to say. "It's the 3 of us," she explained, pointing to each figure, "and our houses. And look, I even drew the swing in the yard and Mommy's flowers." "You captured every detail," Emmett said, admiring the care with which she had represented their intertwined lives. "The teacher asked us to draw our family," Tess continued. "Some boys drew dogs and cats too. Lucy drew her dad who lives far away. And I drew you and Mommy." She looked at him with those enormous eyes, so much like Maeve's but with an expression all her own. "Even with Mommy here, you're still my dad," she said simply. "My heart's dad." The words hit Emmett like a wave of warmth, melting something he didn't even know was still frozen inside him. My heart's dad. That's what he had become, without realizing, without planning. He opened his arms and Tess ran into them, hugging him tightly. Emmett closed his eyes, smelling the scent of baby shampoo in her hair, the smallness of her body against his, the absolute trust with which she gave herself to the hug. When he opened his eyes, he saw Maeve looking at them, her eyes shining with restrained tears. There was something in her gaze, a mix of gratitude, tenderness, and something more, something that had been growing between them over the past few months. Tess pulled away from the hug and grabbed a sandwich, biting into it with gusto, oblivious to the profound moment she had just created. Emmett folded the drawing carefully and placed it in his shirt pocket, close to his heart. Maeve came over and sat beside him, their shoulders touched lightly. "She's right, you know," Maeve said softly. "You're her father in every way that matters." She reached out and took Emmett's hand, a simple but meaningful gesture. "Thank you for staying," she continued, her voice low, just for him to hear. "You changed our lives, and you let yours change too." Emmett laced his fingers through hers, feeling the warmth of her skin, the lightness of her touch. "You both taught me how to truly live," he replied. "To feel, to play, to love." They sat like that, hand in hand, watching Tess run across the lawn again, chasing another butterfly, her laughter echoing through the park like music. A family, built not by blood or by paper, but by love, by care, by the daily choices to stay, to help, to matter to one another. A family that began with a simple phrase on a snowy night. "Can you pretend to be my dad just until the cold goes away?" The cold had passed long ago, but Emmett was still there, and he always would be. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like, because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.